Anyhow, thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you to Josephy and Rich for making this possible. I've been to a lot of these Tuesday sessions and really enjoyed them, gotten a lot out of them. First time I've been in this role here. I plan to speak for 35 or 40 minutes and then open it up for your comments and questions and our discussion. And but if you have something that occurs to you, that a question or comment you want to say in the initial period, just raise your hand and I'll try to respond. Okay, well, let's begin with a story. About 20 years ago, Linda and I were invited, my wife Linda and I were invited to join a group of friends who got together every around the 4th every year. And they would convene at on Orcas Island, one of the beautiful islands in the San Juans, in Puget Sound, and spend 3 or 4 days together, food, fellowship, outdoor activities, a lot of conversation, etc. And we got there and we learned that one of the things they did was on the 4th, they would have a group reading of the Declaration of Independence. They'd sit around in a circle and they'd each take a turn reading and we'd read the thing. Well, I was interested in that, but I was also, I had a couple second thoughts. I thought, my gosh, this thing, well, this year it'll be 250 years old. Is the language archaic? Will it speak to us today? And of course, I thought also that, are you waving at me, Seth? No, we have a guest. Okay. That it was written by a pretty select group, wealthy white men. And in fact, some, not all of them, were slave owners. The principal author of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, while saying that he was in principle opposed to slavery, owned over 600 slaves and did until his death. In addition, of course, there were certainly no women involved in this group or in the Constitutional Convention that followed. And so I just wondered, did not all this compromise that document, the Declaration of Independence, which we celebrate 250 years of this Saturday? So we had our reading. We each took a turn and going around, and I was surprised, shocked would not be too strong a word to say how moving and powerful I found that experience. And how timely it seemed, what we read, the words, the issues, the concerns, how evocative, and how meaningful it was to read it together as citizens and friends. It's by the way short. It's under 1,400 words. It takes 10, 15 minutes at most to read. You too can do it. Now I share this story to ask and to say, and I include myself in this, if you will, indictment, have we taken our history, our founding documents, our principles, and our ideals for granted? Have we as people, as citizens, been, at least in some measure, indifferent, ignorant, even possibly dismissive about these crucial foundations, documents, and principles? And ignorance and indifference for which I believe we are now paying. So today's presentation is a partial effort to redress that issue, to deepen my and our understanding and appreciation for one part of that heritage, particularly the First Amendment, and the principle which the historian Randall Balmer calls America's best idea, The Separation of Church and State. And I recommend that book to you, and there's a couple other books up there that I recommend if you're interested. Well, church and state issues are a hot topic today, and really, if you have your thermometer up on this one, or your flag up, hardly a day passes without some issue pertaining to the interface of religion and politics, church and state. I think many of us will remember that during COVID, some churches and some church leaders felt that their religious liberty was being infringed by requirements against large public assemblies. This spring, both the president and the vice president expressed their dismay at the Pope speaking out on the issues of immigration, treatment of immigrants, and the war in Iran. They didn't only disagree with what he said, they disagreed with his right to say it, seeing it as an interference. Generally, my observation is that politicians are happy to have religious people speak if they agree with them. But just last month, a Texas court sanctioned the display of the Ten Commandments in public school classrooms. And the Texas Board of Education is currently deliberating on which versions of the Bible may be read for Bible readings that are going to be reinstituted in Texas public schools. And versions of the Bible, as many of you know, vary a good deal and have different slants to them. So that's an interesting debate. Just last week, 2 Alaska airline flight attendants who had, in 2022, expressed negative thoughts about a company policy regarding sexual identity in a comment line were investigated and then fired, had a case overturned that reinstates their right to a jury trial. Extra credit, which amendment in the Bill of Rights guarantees you a jury trial? The seventh. But good try. And Secretary Pete Hegseth has been steadily at work as infusing his particular variety of Christian faith into Pentagon policies and into his statements as Secretary of Defense, which he would prefer to call Secretary of War. Recently, he had the Pentagon winnow down a list of 200 acceptable faiths, denominations, religions that would be recognized by the Department of Defense. And this has impact on the worship services that are provided and on who can serve as a military chaplain. That list was reduced from 200 to 30. One of the groups omitted was my own denomination, the United Church of Christ. I think so. It's a lively topic. And I wanted then to take a look together at what the First Amendment actually says. You have on your handout there the words. This was passed by Congress in 1789, and after ratification by the states, all the states in 1791 added to the Constitution, along with the other 9 in the Bill of Rights. Is there someone who would be willing to just stand up and in a good long, loud voice read the First Amendment for us?
I nominate Rick Bob.
Rick has been nominated. I don't know if...
is my neighbor and can probably hear my voice from down the street.
Yes, I know you have a good strong voice, and you're in the front row.
Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances.
Thank you. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Stacy. So just take a minute and read that over again to yourself. What strikes you about this First Amendment? Anything? Popcorn out your answers. What do you know? What?
The word respecting.
Respecting. No law respecting an establishment. Yeah. With regard to something like that. Yeah, it's a somewhat antique usage, but nice in a way. It's something else that strikes you? Anybody? Covers a lot of topics. Yeah, the part having to do with religion is just the first clause, and then it goes on to a number of other topics. Yes, John? Yes, that's right. Congress, of course, Congress is the lawmaking body, although we've discovered, and it's been going on for a long time, that some things are promulgated by so-called executive authority. Something else, that strikes you? Yes. Clarity. Yeah. It's not only the clarity, it's the succinctness, can you imagine any outfit today coming up with something as weighty that was as brief and to the point? What else?
That's what I was going to say, is just the brevity of it.
Yeah.
And you said it covers a lot of ground. It covers a ton of ground and a minimal of words, and it's endured for 250 years.
Yeah, right. Other observations you have? Yes, Mark?
Petition the government for redress of grievances, which allows people to address the government.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yes.
The specific words respecting an establishment of religion. That meaning of that, the intended meaning, is not clear to me.
Ah.
I'd like to hear more about that.
Yeah, well, we will. Establishment of religions means government establishing a religion. And that was the norm at the time. As we shall see, this is really a departure from the norm, a radical departure. But it's Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, meaning no religion can be established by law as the religion of the state. That's part one of this, and then there's part two. Yeah, Mike?
It's not entirely clear what's meant by it. There's no definition someplace else. Also, the word abridging.
Yeah.
Exactly what that means, and what does it actually mean to petition the government for a redress? What would that involve? You can imagine what that means.
Yeah.
It's not defined here.
Well, you're pointing out why we have so many lawyers.
Forgive me.
No, the interpretation, of course, is the is the thing. And that's what we still debate. So there's the first part, no law respecting establishment. Then there's the second part, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. It's a balance. I think something else that's notable to me is just that that is the very first issue in the whole Bill of Rights. So obviously it was urgent, of moment, on their minds, critical. It's significant. Anybody else notice something you want to share, Brad?
I just have a question.
Yeah.
At that point in history, I think religion was fairly strong. I'm surprised that religion, the people were separation of into this. They didn't allow religion to be more active.
Say again.
I'm just surprised at that time in history, religion was, I think, a bigger part of people's lives at that time, and that they would allow settlers would allow that to happen. They would have more religion.
Yeah, another way to frame that would be to ask, good observation, how did they possibly come to this given the prevalence of religion and the prior history? So we'll come back to that. I think one other thing that is noteworthy is that the phrase separation of church and state does not occur here. For better or worse. That phrase was really came into usage in correspondence between a Baptist congregation and Thomas Jefferson, who used the phrase a wall of separation between church and state. And interestingly enough, Baptists were the denomination, the church that were most committed, most strenuously committed to the separation of church and state until quite recently. The Southern Baptist Convention, the largest Protestant denomination in our country, not until 2013, changed course completely on this. Prior to that, their founder, Roger Williams, did I have that right? Yeah, Roger Williams was really the leader, and the Baptists continued to be advocates. They have an entire office devoted to this separation of church and state. Okay, let's turn to some of what the founders had to say on these issues, and I've listed several there. And the first one from James Madison. Madison was probably the most influential person on this issue. He was a Virginian, which meant that he lived in a state where the Church of England or Anglican Church was the established church as a colonial church. He objected to that, even though he was an Anglican. In Virginia, they jailed Baptist and Presbyterian preachers because they, were defying the establishment of the Anglican Church. I can imagine Baptists getting jailed. I have a hard time with saying Presbyterians in jail, but there you go. Anyhow, he writes, the purpose of the separation of church and state is to keep forever from these shores the ceaseless strife that has soaked the soil of Europe with blood for centuries. We'll come back to this, but I would simply note that between 1522 and 1648, which is the period immediately following the Protestant Reformation, and the period in which most of the early colonists came to what would become the U.S., in that period, 120 years, there were 7 wars of religion in Europe, and 8 million people died. So this was really, they were coming from a history and a geography that was really a bloodbath on these issues. And we may sometimes forget that. I think that was very important in shaping their thinking about this. So that's what Madison is referencing here. I'll come back to that a little bit more in a minute. And then next statement is also from Madison. We hold it for a fundamental and undeniable truth that religion, or the duty which we owe to our Creator and the manner of discharging it, can be directed only by reason and conviction, not by force or violence. So the objection here is to compulsion, to compelling people to believe or behave religiously in a certain way, and the use of state-sanctioned violence to enforce it. That's the objection. Now, I included, let's see, I think I have a quote here from Benjamin Franklin, which I included simply because it sounds so Franklin-esque. When religion is good, I conceive it will support itself. And when it does not support itself, and God does not take care to support it, so that the professors are obliged to call for help of the civil power, 'tis a sign I apprehend of its being a bad one. What I was trying to remember, what was his Poor Richard's Almanac, common sense, and all that kind of stuff. That's a very Franklin-esque statement. Preceding the First Amendment was the Statute of Religious Freedom in Virginia. And again, this was principally the work of Jefferson and Madison. And here's an excerpt from that from Jefferson. No man shall be compelled to frequent or support religious worship, place, or ministry whatsoever, and promise that all men shall be free to profess and by argument to maintain their opinions in matters of religion. Again, you get the balance. No compulsion, no control, but freedom to practice. It's, I think, genius. And then George Washington, who became our first president in 1789, said, no one would be more zealous than myself to establish effectual barriers against the horrors of spiritual tyranny and religious persecution. Now remember, not only were all these wars, so-called wars of religion going on in Europe, but thousands of people were being persecuted for their faith. And many of the people who came in the earliest decades to what became America came to escape persecution by usually civil authorities who felt that whatever their minority expression was or different expression was, it wasn't the sanctioned religion, wasn't the established religion, had to be policed and persecuted. There is in the founders' statements and apprehensions a kind of other note. And I think you get that in this one from John Adams. We have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Avarice, ambition, revenge, or gallantry would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. Our Constitution was made for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. So, in a sense, there is a kind of counting on, you might say, the moral influence of religion as supporting this form of government, a democratic republic, and the power of citizens. Yes, Rich?
Wasn't Adams a Unitarian?
I don't know for a fact, but it seems like a pretty good bet, given he was in Massachusetts.
So he would have been in a minority in a sense.
Well, I don't know about that either, but yeah, who knows? He might have been a Congregationalist, but anyhow. Point is that whether he was, Unitarians are in favor of morality too, is generally speaking, as far as I know. But that there was an assumption on, this relates to your question, Brad, that religious influence was necessary in forming the virtues in citizens necessary for democracy to work. And you get a similar statement. Yes, Linda?
Yes, John Adams was a Unitarian. Raised in the Congregational church, he eventually adopted Unitarianism.
There you go. Okay, thank you. Did you get that?
What?
John Adams, Linda check Google, was Unitarian. He was raised in the Congregational church, became Unitarian. Yes, Mike.
That statement about him implies is that, you can't really have moral value unless it is tied to it. I mean, they're equated.
Yeah, that's a debatable point. And it continues to be discussed in our time, but at least he was expressing the view, he says a moral and religious people. I don't know, but, I think it just would have been a common assumption that at least one of the agencies of moral formation was religion, the church. And then you get a much more explicit statement, really, from Madison. Again, the leading proponent of religious freedom. It is a mutual duty of all to practice Christian forbearance, love, and charity toward each other. So he, like Adams, is presuming that these Christian virtues are necessary to the functioning of civil society. And so my point here is that there's kind of more than one note in the words of the founders. Yes.
Well, just look at from, what you would say, the counter would be that we're trying to apply it here, really, through the years to today. And the statement is avarice, ambition, revenge would break the cords of the Constitution. And I think I'm seeing a bit of that.
Do you? Okay. Yeah, that may be one reason to reprise these words of John Adams. Okay, so
Could I?
yes, yeah, Rich.
Just make the small point that you said the word inadequate. The handout says adequate, but I believe what you said is correct, not the way it's printed on the handout. Just in case we happen to hand these to somebody else.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Very good. The last line of Adam's statement, wholly inadequate. Yeah, good point. Okay, so a summary of these might be to say, in a way, Christianity's influence and presence was largely assumed by the founders. Was America a Christian nation? Legally, de jure, statute-wise, no. Culturally, you could probably make an argument that at that time it was. So there's some, yeah.
There was competition between, at the time, Enlightenment thinking, which would have held Christianity at a little bit of a distance, like Jefferson and guys. Also, was there a significant Jewish population at that time?
Yeah, we'll get to that, but there was.
Yeah.
And so let's move on then to some key factors that influenced, and I'll pick up on Rich's point and say this. We use the phrase separation of church and state as if to say those are singular, church, state. Neither one was or is now singular. Remember my reference to which translation of the Bible would be used in Texas schools. It's which church would be sanctioned. So, if the founders had wanted to establish a church or a religion, which would it have been? And in which jurisdictions, geographies, or precincts would it apply? At the time of the founding, you had Puritans, Congregationalists, Baptists, Dutch Reformed, Swedish Lutherans, Jews, Anglicans, Catholics, Quakers, Mennonites, Moravians, Schwenkfelders, aka Confessors of the Glory of Christ, Dunkers, also known as German Baptist Brethren, as well as, of course, of Native American expressions of faith and religion. So there's no singular church or religion. There are many. And if you were going to establish one, what would it be? In the same way, although not quite as much plurality, there were a multiplicity of faiths, there was also layers and levels of the state, just as there are today, of political and governing structures and bodies, federal, state, districts, administrative territories, and institutions. So there's no single state, there's no single church. I think that is just a corrective to the sometimes when we say separation of church and state, we need to remember that it's really more complicated than that and messier. And that's sort of America. Now I'd reference, so that was one factor I think that influenced the founders, was this multiplicity of faiths. Another factor that influenced the founders I mentioned earlier was the history of religious wars in the lands from which they had come. In the wake of the Protestant Reformation in the early part of the 16th century, there was, an explosion, really, of religious sects and leaders and influential people. And this posed a real problem to the powers that be, political and state powers that be, because they preferred to have one religion under their domain. And so these are spoken of as wars of religion in the 16th and 17th century, but really they're wars between states and governing powers and princes and kings over which religion would be permitted in their territory. And they were many, and they were brutal, and they were, and the other side of that, of course, as I mentioned, was that those who didn't conform were harassed, persecuted, driven out. The Schwenkfelders had migrated 7 times. It was their 7th migration to come to Pennsylvania to escape persecution. So just imagine that if you were part of a group that had, in, say a 50-year period, uprooted that many times to try to just find a place where you were not going to be jailed, shot, beat up, what have you. So that was a big influence on the. Now, another factor we need to keep in mind is, even though all that was true, when these folks came to the what became the United States, what they were used to and what they was a state-established faith. And that was what, by and large, happened in the colonies. Congregationalism was established in New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. And Roger Williams came as a Congregationalist to Massachusetts, ended up in trouble because he didn't believe in state sanction of religion, and left and went to Rhode Island, where he established a state or an area at that time where there would be religious freedom. In New York, it was the Dutch Reformed, although there was a very significant Jewish population there. In Maryland, it was the Catholic Church. In Virginia, it was the Anglicans, and in many of the southern and middle colonies, it was the Anglicans, Georgia and South Carolina. So the move that is made then by the founders to make the establishment of religion to move away from that was radical, not only over against the European origins, but even against what was going on in the colonies. But again, influenced by the fact that what were you going to establish among this diversity? And also the awareness of the downside that they had witnessed of the entanglement of state power and religion. So, I think that's several factors there. The prehistory of the religious wars, the multiplicity of faiths and jurisdictions. Now, I would add one other, and here I speak as a Christian. And I'm always surprised that nobody ever cites this, but most of our reading on this is historical and philosophical. Jesus did not ever force his way on anyone. He didn't operate by coercion. He was, in fact, put to death by the combined powers of religion and political power. You might say, analogically speaking, Jesus was killed by an alliance of church and state. So for me personally, that's probably the most important element in respecting religious freedom, is that it's just not the way of Jesus. Now, I understand that's not applicable to everybody by any means, but I find it curious that it isn't more frequently noted. When, as some of you may recall, his disciples moved to use physical force, he said no, and he did not resist power with power, which was a disappointment to many of his followers who thought he was going to, what it meant to be the Messiah was to raise up an army and overthrow the Romans. He did not use violence or coercion or state power to support his ministries, teachings, or his faith. And I just think whether we are Christian or not, that in a debate over should America be a Christian nation by legal mandate, that would seem to me to be like a relevant factor. Okay, so now this issue, I've got a couple more things to say here. Oh, I'll make them quick. This has never been a once and done in our country. This has been debated and struggled with pretty much continuously to our day. I'm not going to go through all of the examples, the major steps in that or the major conflicts in that. Most of us in this room remember what a big issue it was when John F. Kennedy ran for president. Could a Catholic be the U.S. president?
Pope was going to run it.
Pope was going to run it. And so that would be one example of this kind of continuing discussion. The other thing that I think betrayed was that the religiously dominant group, almost up until that time and beyond, were Protestants. And the public school system in its inception was really, and continuing through most of the 19th century, was really a Protestant dominated system. And what that meant was that it was the Protestant version of the Bible. See, we're back to that old issue that was used in the schools. And the Catholics so then started their own parochial school system, and that was one of the points of debate was the funding of those schools. Another one that many will remember is when was under God added to the Pledge of Allegiance?
1954.
1954. And when was in God we trust added to our currency? 1956. What was going on in the 50s?
Cold War.
The Cold War. We were fighting the atheists, and so we were adding. But those are additions, signed both by Eisenhower, as a matter of fact. I'll just end this section here, very shortened, very much truncated, on this being a continuing issue, with what I think is a wonderful quote from Sandra Day O'Connor, first woman justice appointed to the Supreme Court by Ronald Reagan. Those who would renegotiate the boundaries between church and state must answer a difficult question. Why would we trade a system that has served us so well for one that has served others so poorly? Kind of eminent good sense. So I just have one more section here I want to do. There is a second part. If you're enjoying this, I can come back, and that one is mostly on Christianity's broken bargain with democracy. But here I would just say, why are we having this debate about a Christian America today? Well, some of it is just raw political power and politics using religion as an instrument to gain power and influence. There's probably an element of racism in it. There's probably an element of attempt to control minorities, whether racial, ethnic, or sexual. Misogyny, yeah. But some of those urging a Christian America are, I think, motivated, here I'm complexifying the situation again a little bit, by a legitimate, if exaggerated and fearful concern about the lack of or indifference regarding moral and civic formation in America over the last 50 years. Which takes us back to the statement by John Adams, which, as you point out, it's inadequate, not adequate, to address these concerns. I share this concern, as do many, including David Brooks, who in a recent lecture, and there's a citation to this on your handout, the talk was called How We Recover, and you can get it on the internet, on YouTube. Brooks's argument is that we have, in pursuit of a number of other concerns, neglected moral and civic formation as a society. He does a wonderful David Brooksian run through of the different cultural eras. He characterizes the 40s and 50s as a culture of restraint and moral realism. The culture of the 60s and 70s as a culture of liberation and creativity. Note the balance. He has a wonderful illustration, I can't resist giving this to you, of the tension between those two, restraint, moral realism, liberation, creativity. Which two quarterbacks met in the 1969 Super Bowl? Johnny Unitas. Remember Johnny Unitas?
Yeah.
White Sox, crew cut, boring. On the other side of the ball was Joe Namath, Broadway Joe, the 60s and the 70s guy. Namath, playboy, self-promoter, a man of the new era of liberation. By the way, the Jets beat the Colts in an upset. But the point here is, as Brooks continues this survey, is to suggest that we have been living, his or his words, for much of the 21st century in a culture characterized by, quote, loss of faith. Now, he is not using faith in a religious sense, but in a more generic sense, as in confidence, with fides, with faith, confidence. And a corollary to this lack of faith or loss of faith is a precipitous decline in trust at all levels, trust in institutions, trust in leaders, trust in other people, trust in ourselves. So I think this issue of moral and civic formation and education is a real and legitimate one. I think the extreme on the right is operating mostly out of fear and exaggeration. But I think it's a mistake to dismiss this concern entirely. The institutions that we have relied on in our lifetimes for moral and civic formation, the family, the neighborhood, the churches, synagogues, and temples, the schools, the universities, the militaries, the civic clubs and organizations, all of them are struggling today. They've been eroded by a variety of social and technological trends and forces. So I think this is a legitimate concern. I don't think the solution is a state church by any means. I don't think the solution is mandated religious practices in public spaces. I don't think the solution is government by clergy. I know us, and I can tell you we'd be a bad choice. The solution is democratic pluralism, which values and supports those institutions and practices that contribute to moral and civic formation of children, youth, and all citizens. So that's what I got today. As I said, if we want to continue the discussion, I have a second part, but I'm going to stop now, and we should have some time left for further questions and comments. I appreciate those that I've received so far. Thank you so much.